In late 1348, London opened a new burial ground outside its walls before the dying overwhelmed its churchyards. Within 2 years, the ground held more than 2,000 people, laid in trenches, in places stacked 5 deep. They were buried carefully. Someone arranged every body, even while the city lost people faster than it could count. For 600 years, their bones could not say what killed them. The chronicles described it, but proved nothing. Then DNA began to answer. In 2011, 4 victims' teeth gave up the killer's genome. Here is the evidence trail, what we can now prove about the Black Death, and what we cannot. Because for decades, some researchers argued the Black Death was not plague at all, and they had reasons. It moved too fast, they said. It spread in winter. It killed in places with almost no rats. One zoologist proposed anthrax. 2 other researchers proposed a virus, something closer to Ebola than to a flea-borne bacterium. To settle that, you need a sample from an epidemic that ended 6 centuries before anyone could take one. Bacteria do not fossilize. Soft tissue is long gone, and plague itself leaves no diagnostic mark on bone. It kills too quickly to scar a skeleton. A victim can look, to an archaeologist, completely ordinary. But there is one sealed room in the human body, the pulp chamber at the center of a tooth. In life, blood vessels feed it. If a pathogen was moving through that blood, traces can be sealed inside. Then the tooth's hard tissues close over it, the hardest material the body makes, standing guard for centuries. So the method is brutal and simple. Take a tooth, drill the crown, collect the powder from inside. The powder is mostly the victim's own DNA, plus soil bacteria, plus fragments of whatever was in their blood. Ancient DNA survives only in tiny broken pieces. The trick was fishing out the right ones and rebuilding them. From East Smithfield, they rebuilt it. Yersinia pestis plague, the first ancient bacterial genome anyone had ever reconstructed. The skeptics had their answer. The genome identified the killer, but it could not explain the killing. Compared with plague alive today, researchers found no unique mutation that could explain the Black Death's lethality. It sat near the root of the family tree, ancestral to most plague that infects people now. So, if the bacterium looked ordinary, what made 1348 so extraordinary? Something about that world mattered. So before asking why so many died, ask how many. Those receipts are not biological. They are bookkeeping. Medieval England ran on paperwork. Manors recorded every tenant, every death, every transfer of land, year after year. At Cuxham in Oxfordshire, the manor kept accounts for a century. Then, in 1349, they break. The clerk notes that the reeve died before he could say anything about the fodder given to the oxen. That is a catastrophe in an account book. A note about ox feed, unfinished, because the bookkeeper died. At Cuxham, all 12 villein tenants died that year. By 1352, 9 of 13 holdings lay empty. Before the plague, the village held over 100 adults. By 1377, after later outbreaks, 38. And not only the cities. At Thornton Abbey in Lincolnshire, a rural pit held at least 48 bodies. 27 of them were children. Their teeth carried the same bacterium. So villages, not just cities, were digging pits. Multiply that across thousands of manors, wills, and church records, and you get the famous number: half of Europe. That number is an estimate built from scattered samples. Europe never kept a complete register of its dead. Reconstructions still range enormously. Roughly 30% of Europe at the low end, 60% at the high end. In 2022, researchers went looking for the missing somewhere no medieval clerk could have recorded them. In Pollen, when enough farmers die, fields go untended and the grain pollen in the air falls away. Lake mud collects it, layer by layer. Not a head count, an indirect record of how much farming stopped. They read more than 1,600 pollen samples from 261 sites across 19 countries. Some regions show exactly what you would expect: fields abandoned, forest creeping back, a farming system knocked flat. Others show almost nothing. Across parts of Central and Eastern Europe and parts of Iberia, farming carries on. Other researchers pushed back. A change in farming is not a death count. That argument is still live. Half of Europe is an average. Averages hide it. Villages emptied, villages barely touched. The toll is a map. But a map explains nothing. Two questions stay open: where it came from and why it killed like that. Start with where. The trail does not begin in Europe, and it does not begin in 1347. 3,000 miles east of London, beside a lake in Kyrgyzstan, sit two small medieval Christian cemeteries. Their gravestones are cut in Syriac, and most carry a date. Excavators copied them down in the 1880s. Of the 467 dated stones there, 118 fall inside just 2 years. 1338 and 1339. And several of the stones say why. This one died of pestilence. In 2022, teeth from that cemetery gave up plague DNA, pulled from graves marked with that very year. On the plague family tree, that genome sits just before the strains that reached Europe, the pandemic's genetic doorstep. Closely related plague lineages still survive in Tian Shan marmots. They may have been part of the reservoir then. How it crossed a continent is unsettled. One model favors human fleas and lice. Other researchers dispute it. Which leaves the question the first genome could not answer. Why was that first wave so devastating? There is no single proven answer. Candidates include living conditions, nutrition, climate, host susceptibility, and how it was transmitted. In 2025, a clue emerged inside the bacterium. Some later strains carried fewer copies of one virulence gene. In mouse models of bubonic plague, those low-copy strains killed less often and took longer to kill. Researchers suggest lower virulence helped plague persist in fragmented rodent populations. The bacterium was never frozen in time. Plague never left. It lives in wild rodents, still reaches people, and now, caught early, antibiotics work. The chroniclers wrote what they saw. The bookkeepers wrote what they lost. The dead kept the sample.